Welcome to the Theological Lens, where our goal is to see the world, our daily walks, and our worship transformed by the truth of Jesus Christ. Our content is saturated with Scripture, overflowing with faith, and rooted in the good news of the cross. Each episode will proclaim the name of the Lord, calling us to submit to His ways and live lives that glorify Him. With hearts full of thankfulness, we'll explore how Jesus shapes everything, our decisions, our worldview, and our worship, always pointing back to the hope and transformation found in Him.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Theological Lens. I'm so glad that you've joined me today. We've been working through a series of things that I entitled Lessons Learned in the Dark. They are things that have been powerful things for me to learn and understand in a difficult time of my life. And what we're going to talk about tonight is something that has had just a new layer of meaning to it because of the challenges I've gone through. But it's something that is really much bigger than just our dark moments. And so I hope that will be a blessing to you. And like some of the other things we've talked about, this one does not come from me. This is something that I have borrowed from Dr. Dennis Wilhite. And those of you who were at Baptist Bible College, Clark Summit University during Dr. Wilhite's tenure, you will probably exposed to some version of this. But even if you were, stick around because he built some extra layers into this, more than I had originally learned, that have been really, really powerful for me in the last year. And I think they'll be encouraging to you too. Now, for those of you who are listening to this, I'm sorry that you're going to miss out on some really helpful visuals. I'll try to describe them to you. But if you get a chance to watch it instead of just listening, it might make some of this stuff a little bit more clear because I think his visuals are just great. So what Dr. Wilhite introduced me to was something that he called at the time the learning cycle. And what he had put together is kind of an understanding of the processes we go through that change us, that grow us in our lives. And he started with this premise that each of us has a purpose. We were designed by God. We have purposes. He has put us into this world for unique contributions. He has prepared us for those contributions. He is shaping us for those contributions. And because of the purposes that God has for us, then there are things He needs for us to develop. We have to be built into the person that can fill the roles that He's prepared for us. And that usually means processes of change. We are not born ready to do the ministry that God has created for us to do. Instead, He brings us along in a process of growth and change. And that process develops in us skills that we didn't have before. So because of God's purposes, He needs us to develop some things. And in order to develop those things, He brings into our life some experiences. And those experiences are different. Like one person will experience different paths and different circumstances than another will. And the reason for that is because God has different purposes for us. So each of us has a different path, and there might be some similar markers in our path to somebody else's path. But when you look at the whole, our paths are unique to us. And those experiences that we have can be wonderful and easy, but they can also be difficult. And sometimes those experiences create in us tension. They're difficult, they're hard. We have to process through it. It builds in us a sense of uncomfortableness. And maybe it's that very uncomfortableness that is going to force us to consider some things differently. So in the middle of those tensions, when we're trying to figure out why we're so uncomfortable, why we're hurting, why this is so difficult for us, we do some examination. We start processing through what we are experiencing. And in that examination, we are going to ask hard questions. We're going to try to figure out, why is this happening? What does it mean that this is happening? But we're going to be working through, how do we understand this? What do we need to learn? And somewhere in that examination process, we're going to come to some conclusions. Those conclusions might be good conclusions, valid conclusions. Those conclusions might also be bad conclusions. They might be not conclusions that don't actually fit what is happening. We might mistake our conclusions. We might process them in such a way that what we actually draw out of it is not the lesson we should have learned from it. And then those conclusions that we make, we will then naturally apply them into our life. It might change the way we view our world. It might change the way we view ourselves. It will change aspects of our worldview. And those applications that we make will then become integrated into who we are, how we see our world. And then, we're going to start this process all over again. And the truth is, I'm not usually going through one learning cycle at a time. I almost wish I would. But often in different areas of my life, I'm in different parts of a learning cycle. I might be processing one aspect while another tension is just starting to build. There might be things that I'm still integrating from lessons, conclusions that I've come to in times past. The other thing that I think is true of this is that we don't always navigate this learning cycle in a great way. Sometimes we navigate it in a bad way. In fact, sometimes our flesh takes over. And if we work through this learning cycle in our flesh, in our sin, in our selfishness, in our pride, then it's going to change the way we navigate this. So if we think about that first learning cycle that I shared as somewhat neutral, imagine if we go through this cycle with sin and selfishness ruling in our heart, with our flesh ruling. Well, then when we start thinking about needs, we're not thinking about it based on God's purposes. We're thinking about it based on our own desires. And most often, our desires center around control. What I need to have is control over my world. I need to understand what is coming. I need to be able to anticipate. I need to be able to alter aspects of it to suit what I want, my desires. And if we are looking at those needs through what we really want is control, then we're going to view those experiences that we have as a disruption because they're not taking us closer to control. Those experiences are outside of our control. Those experiences are pushing us in ways that we don't like being pushed. They're stretching us in ways that we don't want. And if we view those experiences then as a disruption, then that tension is not going to be neutral. That tension is going to create anxiety. It's going to create this frustration because we're not in control, because those experiences aren't what we wanted. And if we experience that tension in the shape of anxiety, in the shape of this frustration, this upset, then when we start to examine it, we're going to examine it maybe from the wrong perspective. We might be examining it as, what is the problem? Because clearly there's a problem. This experience is a problem because it's taking me farther away from the control that I want to have. It's taking me farther away from the life that I want. It's taking me further away from my own goals, my own desires. So now as I examine this, it's like, what's the problem? And how do we put it back the way it should be, the way I'm in control, the way I want it to be? And if we're doing that, then our conclusions are going to be really rooted in our understanding of the circumstances. And I want you to remember that our examination of the circumstances is so tarnished by our capacity problems as human beings. We just don't think the way God thinks. We don't understand things the way God understands them. We don't have a perspective on our own life that matches His. So when we start drawing our man-made conclusions, then we're going to end up in some really dangerous places. And I think this is where we can build bitterness in our hearts, where people can even start to deconstruct their faith because they examine these circumstances that they don't match their desires. They don't match their goals. They don't match their understanding of what their needs are. And if they don't match that, then it must be a sign that God is not good. It must be a sign that He can't be trusted. So we run into our problems of capacity and sin when we are coming to conclusions in our flesh. Like our fleshly processing does not take us to a good place. It takes us just more and more and more entrenched in a human perspective, in selfishness. And in desires that are maybe lazy. I don't want to face the hard. Maybe they're just demanding what is easy for us, even if it's not what's good for us. So those conclusions are still going to have power in our life, even if they came from the wrong place. And then we will take those conclusions. What we've decided is the problem. Was the problem that God wasn't being good? Was the problem that He didn't protect us from these difficulties? Whatever this problem, whatever these conclusions are, we are going to apply them into our life, because those applications then let us feel like we have that illusion of control. Then we feel like we know what's going on and we know what should be happening, and we're in charge again. And that application gets integrated into our worldview. It gets integrated into our understanding of God. And what happens in that process is we end up in a smaller, tighter world. We have to make our world smaller and tighter so we can control it. And then we're going to go back into more learning cycles. Now, I think I was reminded of this material from Dr. Wilhite last October. And the truth is, last October was probably too close to last July for me to be able to handle things really well. I was doing my best to process my circumstances in the right way. And I think some of those cycles I did well. And some of those cycles I failed abysmally, because I ached so much for the control, because I wanted so much for things to be my way. I thought my way of viewing things was a good way of viewing things, and God should have viewed things the way that I viewed things. And all of that was really tough for me. So I want to just kind of think through how I could have processed this, because maybe you can apply this in a similar way that you might have processed this. Because in my flesh, when I thought about my needs, I would have thought, okay, I need to have this ministry outlet that I've had for these 24 years. I need that to stay the same way, because it's so important for me that I get to continue this ministry. And my family needed CSU to continue, because it was the heart of our financial support. It was both my husband's jobs, my jobs, it was my kids' jobs. I needed CSU to continue. That's what I needed. I needed it to be there for my kids' educations. I had so many reasons why I thought I knew what I needed. And what happened in those circumstances, this experience that God brought into my life, is apparently He didn't agree with what I thought I needed. Apparently He had a different idea about what I needed. But if I look and I examine the circumstance and I'm stuck in my definition of my needs, I'm going to be experiencing some pretty significant tension. That tension is going to be more than just a sense of this is uncomfortable. It is a screaming, aching pain. It was not just anxiety at times. It was an ache that was deep. It was something that was so difficult for me to work through, because the pain was so loud. So in that moment, in that difficulty, when we stop to examine, the lens through which we look at this is so critical. Because if I examine it in my flesh, then I can look at some things that seem so wildly unfair. And I'm going to tell you, I definitely went into this place at moments last fall, because my needs, I need CSU to continue, would even have stretched that to say God needed CSU to continue. We were doing good work for Him, so this is what should happen. I was very, very confident that this is what should happen. And I struggled with some things. I struggled with some things last fall when I read the news about how much financial support that schools that are some Ivy League schools, these people have endowments in the billions. Like, they are sitting on piles and piles and piles of money, and they were still getting a ton of our taxpayer dollars, like millions upon millions upon millions of our taxpayer dollars. You know what? CSU, if you would have just given us a fraction of that, 1% of that, it could have made the difference. Why is it going to those schools when they already have so much money? And why not us? And I struggled with these kinds of examination questions. What is the problem here? Why would God not give us what is being given to these other schools that don't even follow him? That's not fair. Is it fair? And I struggled when I was looking at a story about a scandal in a Christian ministry. And this Christian ministry goes to believers all the time and says, send us your money because we are making a difference for the Lord. You need to give sacrificially to this ministry. And then I read a story and they've got millions upon millions upon millions of dollars in houses that this founding family own. They've got a private jet. Folks, I sat there going, you know what? Nobody at CSU was enriching themselves. I promise you that. None of us were in it for the money, or we wouldn't have made it. Instead, we were there to serve the Lord. So why would God let his resources go to this ministry that was taking and wasting those resources in selfish ways? They were enriching themselves instead of, and I struggled with that. What's the problem? My examination of this could have brought me to a place where God is not fair. He's not right. That means he's not righteous. There's no justice in the middle of this. Where is his goodness? Where is his love? If you are asking the wrong questions that are based on the wrong perception of your needs, you're going to get to the wrong conclusions. And there were times I really struggled with that. And the problem is when we struggle with that and we don't get to the right place, we're still applying it to our life. It is changing us, and it can pull us one little bit at a time away from the right worldview, away from seeing this the way God sees it. So I talked about how we go through this in the flesh, but imagine this. How would this look different if we went through this learning cycle and were spirit-led in it? If we were really, really grounded in our thinking, in our faith? Because I think what happens then is, first of all, when we start thinking about purposes, we have already submitted to the fact that it's not about my purposes. It's about God's purposes. And if you start in that place where God's purposes are the right purposes, those are the ones that we should pursue at all costs, then it changes everything. If we just start in a posture of, Lord, whatever it is that you want, then it's going to change every part of this learning cycle, every part of it. Because if it's his purposes, I cede control. It's not me. It's not what I need to have. It's not the way I want to control my world. It's, Lord, you are in control. I recognize that. It's not that I have to hand over control. You've already got it. I am instead going to embrace and cooperate with the fact that you are the one that is leading and directing my life. And then if we embrace his control over our needs, then the things that we experience become, instead of something adversarial, they become something that is an opportunity. It's a potential that in this moment, this maybe new moment, maybe undesired moment, something amazing could happen. God could do something wild. But I'm not going to automatically assume that experience, that circumstance is negative just because I'm not the one who chose it. I'm not automatically going to reject it, fear it. I'm not going to chafe against it, because who knows what God could be doing in this moment. And if I just sit back and say, Lord, it's not the path I would have chosen, but show me your glory. Show me something cool. Then I'm going to sit in a little bit more peace in that tension. It does not mean that the tension goes away, because new circumstances, the kind of circumstances that refine us and grow us and make us look more like Jesus, those kinds of circumstances, they're going to create tension, because we're human, because they're hard. So we might still have this tension, but in the tension is a rich desire, a thirst to find what God is doing, a thirst to understand better what he's trying to accomplish, a thirst to watch him do something great, a thirst to be changed the way he wants to change us. And that experiencing that tension with that thirst, it might mean, like we talked about last week, that there's some groaning because creation does groan. It might mean that there's difficulty. Even Paul said things were so difficult. He said they despaired even of life. That's a deep tension. But then he said these things happen so we might learn to rely on God and not ourselves. He recognized that there was a great potential in that tension. There was an opportunity for him to grow and learn and depend on God. So if we start in that place, then when we get to this examination piece, it's not a question of what's the problem that needs to be fixed so I can go back to being in control. Instead, it's a question of what is God doing? If we recognize he's the one that's orchestrating this and it's his purposes that matter, then we can face this with just this question. Here's what I need to figure out. What is he doing? If I can ask that question, what is he doing, and cooperate with whatever he's trying to accomplish, then I'm going to get to a better place faster. Now, I do believe that this is our hardest place, even when we are in the Spirit. Because when we are trying to figure out what God is doing, he does not always show us the fullness of his plan. In fact, so often we see just part of it. And sometimes I think in his goodness, he lets us look back over our lives and with hindsight, see what he was accomplishing in that moment. I can think of so many moments in my life. And I look back and I didn't understand in that moment what he was doing, but now I understand. Now I see what he was accomplishing in me. And guys, there are some hard moments that were like that. There are some side quests in my life that I saw as distractions, that I saw as detours that were just slowing me down, that were actually God leveling me up. Are you video game players? There you go. That side quest was important because there were some bigger bosses that were to come. And I had to get stronger with some of those side quests. Well, I didn't know at the time what God was doing. I think about the fact that in the late 90s, God sent me to work at Sears Auto Center for 4 years. Now, I was, for most of that time, the only girl in the building. The good news is it meant I had my own bathroom. But it was a weird world for a young woman to be working at, especially one that came from such a sheltered environment as I did. And here I am working at Sears. And at the time, I thought that maybe this was just God's way of giving me a job that would help pay for my master's degree. And I saw just a fragment. And then I look back over time. God sent me on an internship to figure out how to understand men better and how to work effectively with men and how to lead. He gave me a mentor in that time who was huge in shaping how I would continue to lead and work with men. I'm so grateful for that. But during that time, I did not always appreciate that time at Sears Auto Center. Man, it was tough at times. It seemed so off track. If we are examining our circumstances in ways that we're looking for what God is doing, we might not always see the fullness of it. In time, sometimes we get to see the fullness of it. I still think there are things that we will not understand this side of glory. Because God does things that are so much beyond us. His ways are so much higher than our ways, and his thoughts higher than our thoughts. We will not always understand, but if we start by asking the right question, what is God doing? Then that is going to mean that our conclusions are going to be seeking his voice and not our own understanding. It is about us longing to hear him. I think if we're asking the right questions, then we start looking for the answers, at least in the right place. We seek him for those answers. We humble ourselves and get into his word. We get down on our knees. We raise our hands in worship. And in those moments when we're seeking him to give us those answers, instead of imposing our ideas on top of it, we're going to come to much, much better conclusions. Even if those conclusions don't have the fullness of the glory of God that we might someday understand. We'll start at least in the right place. And then what we do, if we're asking the right questions and coming to the conclusion, seeking the voice of God in those conclusions, then I think what it gives us is an opportunity that instead of freaking out and seeking that control all the more, we can relax into his plan. We can trust his control. We can stop freaking out. We can stop seeing what these circumstances are as the end of the world and start seeing them as the beginning of his beautiful plan. It's part of what he is accomplishing. And that freedom to relax in the way that we apply the right questions and the right conclusions, that gets integrated into our perspective. And what we find is that we are not shrinking back because we're trying to control more and more. Instead, we are growing, we are emerging into a stronger perspective on what is going on in our life as a whole. That growth pattern then sets us up so much better for the next learning cycles that God is going to put us through. It opens our hearts to him and the ability to trust him. And I think that, man, this material by Dennis Wilhite is something that for me, I need to go back to on a semi-regular basis. I've learned it in a couple different settings. I've had people review it. It was something that was really important to my early development as a faculty member. But I got to tell you, boy, has it had a different richness in the last year for me. I don't know why. Maybe because the experiences were so much more powerful for me. And the consequences of going through this learning cycle in the flesh was so much more real to me. And the joy of surrendering in the spirit to what God has done has such a marked peace, a peace that I did not know how to even expect in the middle of the hard. So when I look at the growth track that God has had me on, I don't think this growth would have emerged without the tensions, without the difficulty. He's got a purpose. I still don't know what it is, but I'm going to trust his purpose is best. And if that's true, if I can trust that, all right, bring on the next roller coaster. It might feel scary, but I can trust the designer. And then I can relax into whatever he's going to accomplish and hope that he'll let me see aspects of his glory. Hope that on this frame, maybe in my lifetime, I'll get to see bits and pieces of what he's doing. Because that's so redemptive. I don't think we spend enough time marveling about what God has done. And I think that over and over and over in the Old Testament, the people of God are told that they need to remember, and do not forget. They were instructed to make little monuments to things that God had done. They were warned. These are things that you're supposed to rehearse over and over and over again. It's because we're so prone to forgetting. It is so easy for us. We've gone through these learning cycles and God has let us see aspects of his purpose, but it's so easy for us to forget how faithful he was in that last thing, how amazing, how powerful he was, how wise he was in what he was orchestrating, the beautiful outcome that he was creating. And we have to find ways to memorialize that. My kids are headed off to college on Wednesday of this week. And I got to tell you, that's a wild thing. I'm about to be an empty nester. Boy, this is probably going to be its own learning cycle, I'm sure. But they're going to university. The name is Cairn University. And a cairn was the pile of stones that is made to anchor remembering. It's a monument. And we need those in our lives. We need to create those things so that we don't forget all the good things that God has accomplished, so that we can rejoice in them. And then that will help us embrace the next learning cycles that he's going to take us through. Now, I'm going to tell you, I really shared with you a fraction of the whole of Dr. Wilhite's material. There are layers and layers and layers. And even he talked about how do we shepherd others as they're going through their learning cycles. And maybe I'll share those with you a little bit more down the road. He's given me permission to do that. I'm so grateful for that. But what I will tell you is I think if we grab hold of this and we start thinking intentionally about our experiences instead of just sitting in the yuck of our emotional reaction and those tensions, then I think you will find that it's a good pathway to understand how you process through things and to maybe be intentional about pursuing your own growth, the growth in your faith, your trust in the Lord as you are navigating the life circumstances that God is bringing you through. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I hope it encouraged your soul, and I look forward to having you again on the Theological Lens.
If you enjoyed what you just heard, we invite you to like the episode and, if possible, leave a positive review. If you know someone who could benefit from this content, please share it on your social media. We also ask that you subscribe and follow so that you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. We are so glad that you chose to be with us today. We hope that you will join us again next week on the Theological Lens.